welcome back to Zero Entry. This is episode 5. In this episode, we follow on from our thesis developed in episode 4 that buying behaviour during innovations or changes to new technology in mining is generally driven by crisis. In this episode, I have a discussion with George McCullough, who will be introducing him later, and where we discuss the implications of crisis-driven buying on market size. First of all, George, if you could start with your backstory and just tell everybody why you came to this, topic with me today. Go ahead, George.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Christian. Look, it's really interesting. I've had a very it's been a very interesting career in mining and mining technology, and this whole idea of buying behavior being driven by crises is almost like I can kind of conceptually get that if I analyze how my career has gone. So I studied geology, so I'm technically trained as a geologist, and that was quite accidental, to be honest. But nevertheless, ended up working in operations in South Africa, and did that for a while. And I guess that was really my first. It was my first exposure to quite odd behavior when it comes to making decisions around technology, making decisions around investing in systems and processes. Probably I wouldn't have called it crises then, but certainly it was observable that not a lot got done unless it was an emergency, unless there was, something really had to happen, and then all of a sudden it'd be a mad scramble and a lot of activity, a lot of investment, a lot of money. And then after a few months, when the urgency was over, we'd kind of go back to the status quo, right? We'd kind of just, So look, I saw a lot of wastage, and I also got a bit frustrated that, I'd talk about certain things, but then, expensive consultants would come and say the same things, and then, the company would listen to the consultants. So I decided to go and join consulting because I felt that was a better way to get things done. Anyway, that's led me through lots of interesting companies, but as you say, mostly in the role of trying to make mining companies, trying to make the people that work in mining companies, the technical professionals like geologists, mining engineers, metallurgists, surveyors, so the scientific technical people, trying to make their lives better through software, right? And I've been fortunate in working for, really, really amazing companies that created amazing technology, but, could never quite figure out why it was so hard to actually make money. It was hard to convince people to invest. And there's lots of reasons around that. The minerals industries are quite risk averse. Well, being capital intensive and all. So getting over that hurdle was challenging. But what was the most challenging, what I've found and continue to find being the most challenging, is having any sort of kind of predictability as to how the sales are going to come, and really trying to understand that market, or trying to get enough confidence in the market that you can reliably understand how revenue is going to transpire.
Can I challenge this just a minute there, George? You use the term, and maybe I'm being pedantic here, but you use the term risk averse. And I, in previous conversations, you and I have used that language about mining customers before that they're risk averse. I don't know that they are. You know, I think about what business they're in. You know, let's find someone has drilled some holes in the middle of a desert somewhere, and we're going to invest a couple of $1 billion building a whole lot of kit and rail and ports and ship it to somewhere else in the world. I mean, that's if you think about most mines, is particularly building them and getting them going, are pretty risky propositions. So I don't know that they're risk averse. And if you think to those times that you saw them in that emergency mode where they scramble for solutions, in that scramble for solutions, did you really see them as risk averse? That to me, that's why I've been reaching for some other answer than they look at the situation. I've never tried this before, so it must be bad. I've seen them, you know, when they, what you previously called emergencies, they just dive in. They'll do extraordinary things that I would consider that if you sit in a more calm mode, would think of as very risky.
Yeah, look, it depends, hey. So, and you know, like, let's be precise about the language, because I think it is important, and
it is.
And this is something that everyone struggles with. So, I'm not referring to mining companies when I say risk averse. I actually said the minerals industries, and I think that risk aversion gets expressed in a number of ways, and is caused, the risk averse behavior, okay, is driven by a number of things. The first thing is regulation, right? Okay, because it is a risky business, right? We you know, people do get put in harm's way, and you're dealing with, you know, billions of dollars of capital, and you're dealing with mineral reserves belonging to sovereign nations. You know, so those are all things that need to be protected. So there's a lot of regulation that goes on over there, which means there's a lot of double checking and triple checking, and making sure that, you know, all of those boxes are ticked before you're acting. Except when there's an emergency, then most of that stuff goes out the window. And as long as you're not harming people or killing people, you know, and it's usually when it's a safety related emergency, that's where, you know, literally everything goes out the window and people just pile in. Maybe it isn't risk aversion, but it looks like risk aversion. But maybe the cause is different, and what we haven't really understood what's really driving that before, and so we've just said, oh well, it's because, you know, it's risk averse. So yep, take your point.
I'd give you a different word, a made up word, steady statism. That once you've, you know, don't fix something that ain't broke, that can feel like risk aversion, right? Because you've taken huge risks to get to somewhere that's working, right?
Look, we can debate. This is a topic all on its own, and
I know it is. But that's why it wasn't what I meant to talk about. But hey, you use the word, and I reacted to it,
okay. So very quickly, before we get completely off topic, we'll get back on. But I just want to underscore what you're saying. I think there's something really interesting there, and we all know that there's a timeline. There's a time horizon, you know, that a mine goes through, right? And I think you'll find different behaviors, because there'll be different drivers at each stage of that mine's life cycle. Okay. But it was very interesting. I was at IMARC in I think it was 2019, and a very senior person from BHP was giving a keynote speech, and it was probably one of the better discussions that I've seen recently. And the crux of it was, you know, BHP I mean, it's a fantastic company. It's, something that Australia can be quite proud of. It does a lot of good things, has made profit for almost its entire existence, right? So his challenge that he was highlighting is how do you go and challenge people in BHP that have never not made a profit, right? How do you challenge them to improve?
Well,
so that kind of is exactly what you're talking about, that steady statism, because there's no impetus, there's no incentive, there's no burning log, there's no drive to improve. So
until something goes terribly wrong,
something goes terribly wrong.
Like was covered in episode 3 of this channel with the Gavin Yates interview, where iron ore went cash negative. Yeah. So that actually highlights your point. So how do you frighten a bunch of people who've never made a loss? Well, you make them a loss. And remember that, if you remember that interview, they scrambled and they turned their whole world around in 9 months, right? And then they went to an entirely another division, which was in steady state, tried to, and it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So this is almost this is getting back to really fundamental human behavior, and I think that's what we're going to find more and more and more.
Yes.
Is there's some fundamental laws, human laws,
Well, that's what I was trying to get to with this channel. Yeah.
Of psychology that we've kind of missed. We've forgotten about, and they're actually they're quite impactful in the decisions we make. But anyway, that's getting a little bit.
Yeah, we're getting off it, but it's kind of highlighting the things that we're actually talking about, that it isn't. So I just like to challenge the fact that we're risk averse, because once the emergency hits our industry, I'd actually salute our industry in that when the when the water hits your ass, we're an industry that learns how to swim. So let's move off to actually how you look at markets, and try and apply some of that to how you and I traditionally, when we've talked about markets previously, and haven't put that overlay on top of it, because we tend to get numbers about total addressable market, and we'll just talk through that mechanism, and then ultimately we'll try and apply it to pre-recording, you and I both agreed that we would talk about a project you and I both worked on together that actually failed. I love talking about failures, because if you're going to learn something, you better learn something from your failures, and try and understand that. So we're going to look at something that's not a product anymore in the market, and how we would, if we had today's thinking, how we would have applied it back in the time when you and I worked together on that product.
Yeah, sure.
So anyway, I'm going to start with the first step in when you and I have worked together, the first step in our thinking is actually trying to describe the maximum number of participants in the market. How do you think about that today? Sort of.
Yeah, this is really, really interesting, and I think this is why this is why I love working in this industry, because it punches well above its weight. I'll tell you a little story quickly. I was having a conversation with a very well-known senior manager in mining. She's worked in some of the biggest mining companies in the world, and currently works in one of the largest technology companies in the world in mining. And we were talking about the size of mining in total, and she highlighted to me that there are less than 700,000 professionals globally that work in the mining industries, right? So if you think about that, that came as quite a shock to me, because especially as a software marketer or someone that's used to thinking about how do I get licenses or seats into the hands of people, and streams of revenue based on that, a total my total pie is 700,000.
It's not a Google, is it?
It's definitely not a Google. By contrast, there are 400 million people that work in financial services. So, you can make a lot more mistakes if you're taking products into financial services than if you're doing it into mining. And it also has some serious implications for your pricing strategies as well. And I think one of the things that has been quite confusing for people that come from other industries, and they look at a piece of, let's say, geological modeling software, and they inquire about the price of a license, and they get told it's $50,000 or $80,000 for a license of this technical software. And it's almost unbelievable, when you go and compare it with, the likes of Salesforce,
AutoCAD or something like that, yeah.
or something like that. And and the reason is because there's a small global market, very, very small market, and technology companies, those are the prices that they need to command in order to make any money. So look, I've learned quite a lot about trying to understand what the market sizing is, but I think the way that I've generally approached it is, I've had a look at, obviously the corporate structure of companies like tier ones, tier twos, tier threes, juniors, things like that, because there's different buying behaviors there. The mining industry is actually not one continuous industry. It's actually a number of industries. So, the copper, copper is sufficiently different to iron ore that you could actually treat those two as separate industries, or definitely separate segments. And then, also,
George, before you get into the segmentation, I kind of, when I get to segmentation, this is the way I do it. The segmentation is where I get to subtraction mode. So, for example, if a product works well in coal but not copper, that's what I'm saying. How do you think about the whole universe of possible customers, and then you kind of, this is how I do it. I kind of get into that kind of thinking that you're just doing there, where you're subtracting things by segment, and you start thinking about where it doesn't fit. The reason,
that's right.
Now, I think that's a bit different from the way marketers do in, say, consumer industries, right? You tend to define the segment and then count them, who's in the segment. I think in mining, it's kind of the reverse, because the universe is so small. So
that's right.
If you're looking at operating mines in the big operating mines, so there's big ones, I don't know what numbers you typically, I mean, back in the day, we were looking at what, 1,300 in the world.
Yeah.
Let's call it 1,500 now, right? Say there's a few more in the world. So just to keep round numbers going here, that there'd be, there's no consumer market that you'd be going for where you'd say there's 1,500 customers in the world, right?
And sorry,
that's why I think you go the reverse. You don't define your segment and then count them. You count, because it's actually easier to find all the ones that, if you could, like, if it's an operating mine, it's 1,500. If it's a closed mine, there's a lot of mine closure type products as well. That might be something like 4,500, maybe something like that, 5,000. If it's a pre-fees mine, you might only be dealing with 300-400.
Yeah, so that's right. I think at this point it's also just, let's just again set the context and just make sure that, because this is why there's a different approach. Okay, is because we're talking here specifically about technical software.
Yes,
right? We're not talking about accounting systems. We're not talking about ERP systems. We're not talking about word processing, applications or things like
Well,
that. What we
yeah, I suppose this is technical. This is zero entry. That's the name of the channel. It's how we get to that. There's no human beings in the mind, which is the technological revolution. So yes, what we're talking about is robots, software, digitization, those things. How do we get there, right? And
which is why I think you have to take what you're calling subtraction approach rather than the segmentation approach, because each of those applications or the technology have a specific purpose, a specific use case, and like you say, they're not going to work in every single area.
Yes.
So the consequence of that is, people might be tempted to think like, I think we got to that figure of 1,500 by looking at all the mines in the world that generated, I think, more than $100 million a year.
Well, back in the day, mate, the number was, what was it, 1,400 that we actually.
Yeah, 1,400.
So not only did we define them, we counted them. Now, there's not many markets that you could literally name every single buying entity in the market, right? Literally everyone.
No, that's right. And I think there's another thing to just call out over here, and just just think about how, if there are only 700,000 people in mining, but you go and have a look at the global mining revenues, right? And you have a look at the global mining market caps, even though they're small, it's an industry that still punches well above its weight.
Oh yeah, the expenditure a year. What's your estimates? I've come up with estimates. Have you ever estimated the total spend of that 1,500?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, okay. I have. Basically, the numbers I come up with is 1.5 to 2 trillion a year, USD. And here's the interesting thing, because sometimes we also get compared with the oil and gas market. When you look at, it's the same actually. So you know how you said like conventional oil and gas is about 2 trillion a year spent, right? Mining, and let's just say for the moment, for the sake of this argument, mining as a whole is 2 trillion a year. So you might say, oh, it's the same, but no, you've just said, but it's not one market. So if you had a product for the oil and gas market, you often, haven't you had that over your lifespan, or in, why can't you be like oil and gas, right? And all the time, right? And that's because oil and gas, same size, but it's one market. Whereas mining is not. So once you do the subtract, so you might go to oil and gas and there won't be any subtraction for many products. If it's good for one, it's good for all. In mining, that is seldom the case.
And there's another feature that comes that there's another feature of the industry that you can see mirrors that kind of behavior. There's not as much fragmentation in the company, in the landscape of companies that provide services and technology into oil and gas. It's quite uniform, right? Whereas if you go and look at mining, the METs, the mining engineering technology services, it's highly fragmented and highly specialized.
It's crazily so.
Yeah. So look, anyway, just getting back to this whole subtraction thing, because I think this is where it gets really interesting. I think, you might be tempted to, you might actually look at the initial numbers of the total addressable market. If you go and say, well, we've got this product that's, that I can sell to mines, and there are 1,500 mines, and you say, well, that's not a lot of mines, but I'm going to sell this product at $1 million each, and you think, you do that straight multiplication, and your total addressable market size, looks quite attractive. And I think that's what's, that's what initially leads to a lot of people being quite excited and getting, and investing to actually achieve that. But once you start doing what you're talking about, which is saying, well, hang on, let's say I'm selling to, let's say I've got, a product that works for flotation, right? It optimizes flotation, right? And you're going to say, well, okay, so let me go back to my total addressable market. There are 1,500 mines in the world. How many of those have processing plants? And then, so
How many of them have flotation? Yeah.
You'd have to, and then this only works for flotation. So then you'd have to subtract all the ones that don't use flotation.
Yeah.
And now you're down from you're down from 1,500 to probably 600, 500.
Yeah.
And then you've got to start going, well, how competitive is this product? How niche is this product? Am I going to be the dominant player, or am I just going to be a player? And if you start actually doing the arithmetic,
we'll do one of them later. We're going to do that as an example later. Yeah.
So the point is, once you think that it's a big market, but actually it's not. I think it's quite confronting. I had a conversation with someone recently where we actually did kind of do that exercise. It's a company that's got a well-established portfolio of software products that have been in the market for 20 odd years, and they're keen to make a much bigger push. So
wait a minute. Let me get the story right. The story is, I've got this product. It's a long-standing product, and all we have to do is sell it more.
We've just got to work harder.
We've just got to work harder.
We've just got to work harder. Right? We've just got to work harder. We've got to hire more people, or we've got to do more marketing, or we've got to get into LinkedIn, or we've got to do this. We've got to do that.
Yeah, you just got to push harder, and it will just happen.
Because there's lots of mines, right?
And I used to believe that.
Yeah, well, we all did, right?
Yeah. And this is where I've had a bit of a change of thinking. But anyway, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, it was literally going through that process.
Yeah. It's confronting. It is.
Yeah, this person was, ended up, being confronted with the fact that it's a structural issue. There's nothing he can do.
Yeah.
There's nothing he can do. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of things he can do, but they're not the conventional things that you would expect to do, like work harder, hire more people, do more marketing, all of that kind of stuff. So
because that gets us to the next step in this conversation,
right? Yeah. Because your previous podcast or video or entry into this channel was about crisis.
Yes.
Right. And I think, okay, so you immediately get confronted by the whole subtraction thing. But now I think when you throw in this idea of crisis,
yes,
now things get really, really
bad.
Really difficult.
because that's the conclusion I've come in. The rate determining step is not the push, but the pull, right? If crisis drives buying behavior, I'm going to buy something like the mining industry is in steady statism, okay, my invented word. And then in random intervals, it gets into crisis. And when the crisis, commodity price, disaster, natural disaster or something, right? It doesn't matter where the crisis come from. That's the nature of them. They are random events. And it's the rate of those random events, which is the structure. If crisis drives buying, and this is the fundamental thing we're coming to here. If crisis drives buying, then it's the structural probabilistic event of the crisis occurring that drives buying behavior, particularly with new products, right?
Yeah.
So
because it almost drives the adoption.
Right? It is.
It drives the adoption.
Yeah, and so once and I'm sure you've been fooled like I have been fooled on occasion, that you do a number, you even if you did the right thing and you go, here's my 1,500 mines, I do my subtraction, I still come up with a number like 500. Not my 20s are bad, but there's a lot of products that you get to 500 or 800 or Even 200 you can probably do reasonably well with. And then you multiply it by, you know, the high unit prices that our industry tends to pay, as you've also pointed out earlier. And you end up with addressable markets. And, you know, often enough, you see numbers like $500 million, $1 billion, $2, even $3 billion addressable market. And you kind of go, yay, this is marvelous. You know, let's invest. And have you had that experience? Because I certainly have.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised that if you went and you spoke to most people in business development, in technical consulting, or you know, technical software marketing, they would all have they would all admit to, you know, doing the first couple of steps and going, wow, that's a big market.
Correct.
It makes perfect sense.
And I think the whole premise of this interview and this channel is that it's, if crisis drives buying behavior, you actually have to figure out crisis frequency. And then once you apply crisis frequency, which is so many crises per year, you turn your addressable, like all things, you've got a static thing, addressable market, and then you have a rate thing, and then now you've turned it into a rate per year.
Yeah.
Right. And then and so what I suggest we do now, because you and I have worked on a product previously, it was a product called Mining Dynamics. It failed. But what's interesting, you know, we discussed this this episode, was that there's at least 3, possibly 4 products in the market that came after Mining Dynamics. You could say we were early or something, but we didn't pick it wrong. There was a need in the market, but I thought that if we could just illustrate to viewers out there how you can misconstrue a market and how your view of it fundamentally changes if you go into the crisis frequency. So when did we start on this journey? Circa when was that?
Well, I think it kicked off. Look, it kicked off. I think the initial planning was in 2005, but really I got involved, and we built the team.
2006. So call it 15 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
And if we go through the exercise, let's just do the setup for the viewers. This was a basically data integration workflow product, correct?
Technical data integration. So, you know, like wireframes, block models, you know, spatial objects.
So all talking to each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was a huge lack at the time, you know, and still to this day, right? Still to this day, most of this is siloed in function point software systems. And you, how often do you keep hearing complaints about it to this day? A lot, right? So if you thought about it, there'd be like 1,500 of these. So all 1,500 mines in the world collect data of some sort or another. How would we do the subtraction? How would you think about? So it is operating mines. You wouldn't think about it pre and post. So 1,500 probably is a starting universe. Now the subtraction, you would. This was a like enterprise software. So
that's it. So like this.
Yeah.
The whole purpose was to integrate data. So the first thing that you'd have to subtract is mines that weren't at a sufficient level of digitization.
Yes.
So for Mining Dynamics to be useful at all, you know, you needed to have geological modeling being done, you know, in a digital environment. You needed to have your design and planning being done in a digital environment. You needed to have, you know, digital feedback from operations back into your ore characterization and your resource definition. So, you know, there was a prerequisite level of digital maturity, and that would wipe out from that 1,500 number.
Mm.
You'd probably only be talking about the tier one companies.
So just pick a random number. ICMM. I had some interactions, with around market sizing in the tailings dam space, and
Yep.
when you look at tailings dam managed in the world, a third of them were the ICMM companies. So
Yeah,
2/3.
I'd say
So if you said a third,
Yep.
or 2/3, the subtraction is 2/3 weren't that far down the track, and the degree of digitization is what makes you a tier one company in a way.
So that means that you've gone from 1,500 now to 500.
Correct.
Right. So
Yep.
that's
It's a big drop.
It sharpened things up a little bit.
All right. So you'd sell one of these implementations per mine, in theory. That'd be fair.
Yeah. I'd say that maximum.
Yep.
You wouldn't have more than one. But your goal would be to get one implementation per mine and unify all of that technical data.
Yep. And implementation license costs upfront.
Well, it's it's a fairly big job. The software itself has a cost, but then the implementation, you're looking at about $1 million.
Yep. Okay. So these are good round numbers just to work with. Now, if I remember correctly, you and I, this is where we kind of stopped, isn't it? So you take your 500, you multiply that $1 million. That's $500 million.
Yeah, awesome.
Holy crap. Yay. Right. Now, if we now add that last little element, which is the crisis drives buying, right? So what is the crisis that would, and we know there are at least 4 products out there, so people are buying these things, right? They weren't buying back then, but they are buying these things today. So what is the crisis that would get a mining company to say, oh my God, this can never happen again, we must fix it, right? And how often does that occur? Because it's not, oh, my geological model isn't talking to my mine planning software. It's not that kind of problem, is it, that drives the buying of these things? It's an enterprise system, so it has to be an enterprise crisis.
Yeah, so these are, look, I mean, this is really,
and this is what we didn't talk about back then.
Because we've got the the advantage of 15 years worth of observing the actuals, what actually happens since then, and what drives that behavior now. But there are very few things,
correct,
that cause a crisis that big that somebody goes, we must absolutely want to have that. And they generally related to things like regulation, because as you say, it's an enterprise system, so it's I mean, you might
it's probably something like you reported your reserve to the stock market incorrectly or something like that, and the new CEO
doesn't want
it to happen to him after they've seen the last CEO get fired or something. I think we're seeing similar things with like indigenous caves being blown up, and the next CEO will be saying that means never again type stuff. Yeah, so it's at enterprise level, it's got to be the never again stuff that that drives it.
That doesn't really happen in terms of data integration. That doesn't really happen that often.
Right? But we can now see. So back then, 2006, I think we were early movers in that market. Well, we're trying to be early movers in the market. So these events haven't. So if you look now in hindsight, you and I, we've discussed this, and we think there's 4 companies out there that sell that kind of service on technical systems. Yeah.
If we had to compare apples with apples, looking at that kind of level of technical integration, that's that kind of data, I'd say there's probably 4.
Yeah, and we, based on our industry knowledge, we were guessing kind of like 12 implementations each. Is that?
Yeah, somewhere between 10 and 12.
10 and 12, yeah. So that,
you know, the rough rule of thumb, like basically one a year. Right?
Yeah. So that gets us to, roughly speaking, there'd be 50 of them, implementations out there now. It's taken 15 years to get to 15. So that's roughly, 3 to 4 sales a year. So it does happen. So so across 500 companies, your experience
500 sites,
500 sites out of 500 sites, roughly speaking, let's just use round numbers. It's 3 crises a year that will drive buying behavior, and there are 4 companies. So by my numbers, that means in any one year, at least one of them is going to miss out on a sale.
Yeah, and if I reflect and I have a look at, if I reflect now and I look at those companies that are selling those types of products, and you talk to the folks in those organizations, they've got a 2-year sales cycle.
Yeah,
right.
That's what I see as well. 2 years.
So it kind of matches up.
And remember, at the end of a sales cycle, the answer can be no.
Yep.
And more than often is no.
Yep.
Right. So let's just go back to our $500 million market, which you and I saw back in 2006. Dollar signs in our eyes, right? Ching, right? 3 crises. Now, if we had have asked ourselves the question, how many crises do you get a year? And we now know, on average, it looks to be about 3 to 4. So that means that total addressable market of $500 million turns into a $3 to $4 million a year in new sales. It doesn't count the annuities you get. You'll get annuities after that. But just in new sales, the total.
So this is, I mean, this is sobering. This is sobering kind of data, especially for people that are starting out, right?
Yes.
Because I think if if this becomes like an add-on, it's like if you're already engaged in a market that's adjacent or similar, and you've got products, and this can kind of be an add-on, and you can leverage your existing sales force, and you can look for efficiencies and things there, then I think it's okay. But if you're starting from a standard, from a
standing start,
and this is the kind of analysis that you really need to do before you jump in.
I know. I wish I had have done it back then. But here's the thing. Every one of those 4 companies that we know of that does this particular task that we set out to do in 2006 had mature customers, customer relationship with other products, with annuities in the market. Because what we haven't talked about here is that if there's 500, again, another nature of the bloody mining industry, it's geographically scattered. So that 500 market is everywhere. So you're only getting, your sales are 3 out of 500 a year, but you've got to multiply it by the number of customer relationships you have. So let's say you only have, so if you, again, this is a $3 million a year market because there's only 3 crises a year. Let's say you're a big guy in the industry and you've got access to half of that market. No one has 100%. Let's say you're a big guy and I've got access to 250 of that. Okay. That means I'm only going to be bidding on 1.5 sales a year because that's all I'm going to see on average. Now, if it's a contested market and I am the big guy, I only get, if you're Coke, you're going to have 40% of the market. So now I'm going to take 1.5 times 1 million times 0.4. Whatever, I don't know what that is. It's like 600,000 or 700,000 a year. That with lots of volatility in sales,
Yep.
right? So there's going to be long times between drinks, right? But my average is going to be the 600,000. Gee, that doesn't look anything like the $500 million total addressable market.
500 million.
You know, this is, and so once you apply that crisis frequency thing, oh boy, does it give you a whole different view of the market. And I don't know what you want to say. I think that's pretty much where I wanted to get to with this discussion with you. So take it away, George. Where does that leave you, other than feeling cold and wondering how many things? Oh, I don't know. How do you reflect on things of the past and in the future? Well, first of all, do you believe it? I mean, does this gel with you?
Look, I believe it because I've got data and I've got experience that matches up. It lines up. I can do the sniff test and the numbers look, and I can take experiences from the previous jobs and businesses I've been in, and I can run a number of scenarios in retrospect.
Yes.
And
like we just did.
And they all work out, right?
Yeah.
So I think what it means for me is, and I mean, this is kind of like a bit of a discussion that people who are, being attracted into the industry, into the mining industry with new technology and things like that. I think it's just really, really good to, have a bit of a think about how you approach this industry from a market sizing point of view, as opposed to, what you might read in an MBA textbook. It is a bit unique and it's a bit different. And I think what's been interesting in going through this with you and thinking about the impact of crisis, or crisis driven action, or buying behavior, whatever, kind of explains a lot of stuff that I haven't really been able to explain until now. And knowing this now, it certainly makes you think about different approaches, not the same traditional approaches, because I think that's just too hard. It's hard work.
Anyway, do you have a last takeaway before we go?
No. Look, no, it's been great, and looking forward to seeing how this turns out. And let's not forget about some of those other interesting topics.
Well, that brings this episode to an end. I'd like to thank George McCullough for helping me out with this episode. I think this is a good format. You're just having this sort of conversation about a topic. I think I'm going to continue to do that. Provide comments below if you have your own view. And I'm sort of mapping out future episodes more around business strategy. If this is indeed the way you size markets, what's the implications as a supplier's business strategy? What's the implication if you're a miner? George also separately suggested that I probably need to have a look at the M&A activity that's starting to heat up in our sector. So that might also be a good topic. But if any of you guys have an opinion, please provide input below. Anyway, until next time, subscribe and you'll hear about my next episode when it comes out. Cheers, everyone. Bye.